Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a real-world preview of the brand new Sony a6700, which is a cropped sensor camera. Now, before I get into all the specs, I do want to let you know we are filming with this camera right now with a 35 1.4 here in the studio, so you can see how the video quality looks. But what did I shoot with it? I shot the Philadelphia Phillies as well as the Union before I flew out to Chicago to hang out with Manny Ortiz and photograph the Phillies playing the Cubs at Wrigley Field, and then off to Las Vegas, where I stayed at the Flamingo Hotel, shot some flamingos there because they have some flamingos out back, as well as shooting something called slam ball, which is a new sport that's coming out on ESPN. You actually may have seen it 20 plus years ago, but it is a really good thing for me to test out a camera just like this. Now, the a6700 that we used has firmware 1.0 on it, which does tell us that it's probably a production unit, but we could not open the raw files just yet in Adobe Lightroom. But the JPEGs do look pretty good straight out of camera, but that's why we're not calling it a full review, because we can't open those in Lightroom just yet. But now let's jump to the body. It's very similar to the FX30 as well as the A7C, but with a slightly bigger, better feeling grip. I will say that the camera does feel pretty good in the hands. They added a front dial for the first time so that you can change your aperture on the front. I still did find myself swinging my finger around like this on the back dial. That didn't actually change anything because I actually have a front dial and a back dial now. They also moved where you can go from photo to video as well as the slow speed and the quick speed. It's a dial on the back of the camera, which I think is smartly placed and in a good position. Now, what it doesn't have is a joystick, which does make it a little more difficult to move things around if you just want to be able to switch things. You don't have a joystick on the back of this camera. Now, Sony says this isn't their flagship APS-C camera, but it's their flagship APS-C camera in my mind, because you had the a6600 from 4 years ago, you now have the a6700, and there's nothing else in the photo world on Sony's side in crop sensor that's above this, which in my mind makes this a flagship type camera. But it also compares against Canon's R7, because that is Canon's flagship APS-C size camera. And we're gonna do a little bit of comparing from time to time throughout this preview, but we will do a separate video putting those head to head because they are very similar. Now, Sony wanted to make a point about size differences between the two cameras, that the a6700 is 35% smaller and 21% lighter. Yeah, it's a small and light camera, but at the end of the day, it's really not that big of a difference between those two cameras. Sony did update the menu system here. You now have the tile menu as well as being able to swipe on the screen and access different menu settings that are all customizable, so you can work that any way that you want it. I do find that Sony's menu is pretty damn deep. Obviously, once you learn it, you know where everything is, but also once you set up the tiles or the swipe up menus or the swipe over menus, you kind of have everything you need right at your fingertips and don't really need to dive as deep into the menu system after that point. Now, in terms of the viewfinder and the flip out rotatable LCD screen, not much has changed here. It's still on the left-hand side. I would prefer it to be more camera-like and not more rangefinder-like and have it right in the middle. Now, the EVF is 2.36 million dots, but it now has a 120 frames per second refresh rate, and I think it's absolute garbage. Now, let me explain that in just a second, because you have that 3-inch flip out rotatable screen that's 1.03 million dots that is also garbage. I say it's garbage because when I'm looking at the images that I've taken on the LCD or inside of the electronic viewfinder, they look terrible. But when I got the JPEGs back on the computer, I was like, damn, these are really good. They're nice and colorful, nice tones, nice sharpness. You don't get the same representation inside of the viewfinder. So if you don't think you're getting something good in the camera, it's not your fault. You're probably getting something good because the camera's doing a nice job. It's just not being represented well with the electronic viewfinder or the LCD screen. Hello, Sony. You guys make like OLED TVs. You make the best stuff in the world, but you can't put a panel in this camera. It still has to look like crap. I know you need to save money somewhere, but at least make one of them better than the other, because Canon gets it right and Nikon certainly gets it right with their nice EVF, and of course their screens are really nice. Moving on, you have the same inputs that you normally have. You have your microphone, your headphone, you have your HDMI ports, you have USB-C charging, plus you can do 4K at 30p for streaming. Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you FroPack 3 in action on this JPEG from the A6700. And yes, it works on JPEGs. We've got Zoolander, followed by Winnebago, Walter White, Prestige Worldwide, November Rain, Mount Airy, Mentos, MDMA, King Contrast, Eckert, Capone, Canadian Tuxedo, Almost Famous, Fifth Element. That is a lot and they work, but my all-time favorite with one click here is Skittles. Look how good that looks. So if you want to speed up your RAW workflow for RAWs and JPEGs or on mobile, or you're tired of people's presets just not working, you just saw almost every preset from FroPack 3 working on this JPEG image. So to check out FroPack 3, head on over to froknowsphoto.com/FroPack3. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters. If you decide to pick them up right now, they are still on sale, but they will be going off of sale soon because FroPack 4 is on the way. And if you want to get Skittles and save even more, you can get the triple play bundle that has FroPack 1, 2, and 3. Now, let's get back to the preview. Now, moving on to the image sensor, we finally have a new 26 megapixel BSI APS-C sized sensor that is the exact same sensor that you find in Sony's FX30. The ISO range is native 100 to 32,000. I did push it pretty far when photographing slam ball, and I do have to say the JPEGs looked pretty good. And I turned off all the high ISO noise reductions inside of the camera, and they held up fairly well at 5,000 or beyond. But you do need to be careful. Now, this is a good time for me to bring this up. I used mostly quality glass on this camera. The last thing I want to do is put subpar quality glass on this camera and everybody be like, well, this camera looks terrible. It didn't get good results. Now, yes, people may buy less expensive glass on less expensive cameras, but I want to show what the camera is capable of. That's why I used everything from a 200 to 600 to a 50 1.2, 35 1.4, 135 1.8, 70 to 200 2.8, as well as the new 70 to 200 f4, which we'll have a separate review on at some point. But you put good glass on this stuff, which allows you to push the ISO up not as high because you can let more light in. Just remember, glass, 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 glass. I'd rather have you spend more money on glass if that means getting a less expensive body but better glass, then I'm all for you doing that because you're gonna get better results. Now, how many frames per second can you get? You can get 11 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, and you would think that you can get more with the electronic shutter. Is that correct, Steven?
No.
No, that's not correct, because guess how many you get, Steven?
11?
You get 11 with the mechanical and you get 11 with the electronic shutter.
11!
Kind of makes no sense. Why do I say that? Because Canon with their R7, this is one of those comparisons, can shoot 15 frames per second with the mechanical shutter and 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter. You're getting more bang for your buck in certain situations. But how is the rolling shutter? Well, you tell me looking at this boomerang of a baseball bat that you see on the screen right now. That's pretty bad. That is some super rolling shutter. It's almost useless to use with balls sports. So if you're shooting anything that has balls involved with it, you might not want to shoot electronic. But the truth is, why would I even shoot electronic if I'm not gaining anything more than the ability to be silent? That's the only time you would go into electronic. I like to use electronic in sports when it comes to the Canon system because you get more frames per second, and every once in a while you get a little bit of a warble in the ball or the soccer ball, but for the most part the bodies will be fine. So just be aware that with the electronic shutter in this Sony a6700, you might end up with some warbly shutter effect. You can see from this picture that when you use full mechanical shutter, you are freezing the bat perfectly and you're freezing the ball perfectly. It's not an issue at all. Now you do get those 11 frames per second, but how big's the buffer? Well, you can get 59 shots in a row from raw compressed files. Now I shot raw lossless compressed and I didn't outrun the buffer there because you get a couple of less frames, but at 59 raw files in a row is perfectly fine. I didn't outrun the buffer, and if you're shooting for more than 3 seconds with your finger pressed down, you probably should be punched in the face or slapped in the face if you like that a little bit better. But some people are into that. Now, in terms of memory cards, you have one SD card slot, whereas Canon's R7 has 2 SD card slots, but it is a UHS 2 SD card slot that you are getting here. But I do like having redundant. You just don't have the option in this camera. Let me jump in here and say, would you like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations? If you said yes, just look for this orange box over on phronosphoto.com, put your name, email address in it, hit send it. I'm going to send you that guide for free. Now, I generally like to shoot the highest RAW file format possible, which is uncompressed RAW, wherever I can do that. This camera doesn't offer you uncompressed RAW. Does it matter at the end of the day? The answer is no, because anybody looking at the pictures that I took with this camera is never going to be like, was this compressed, uncompressed? It's just a personal choice there. But also, with that being said, if you didn't know what camera I shot the pictures with that you're seeing, you would have never sat there and said, oh, was this a crop sensor A6700? That's a testament to quality images. I wanted to really say how good I am, but I didn't want to be pretentious. Being that I shot a lot of sports, how is the autofocus? I mean, we're using it right now here in the studio, so hopefully it's locked on me, which I do suspect that it should be, because this camera does have the new AI processing unit that is in Sony's a7 R5. Now, before I get into all of the specs about the autofocus system, why don't we show you a bunch of EVF clips that take you inside the camera to see the autofocus working in the real world. So how do you think the autofocus did? It looked pretty good, and in reality, it did a very good job. You can certainly see the improvement in the eye-AF detection from a distance because the box gets much smaller. It knows where the eye is. It finds it really well. Sony says it's 60% better. I don't know the difference between 60, 100, 50, 40, 30. It doesn't matter. It works slightly better. Now, I did notice in certain situations that when I was shooting baseball and there was a distracting background, it might jump around to the background in the first place, and I really needed an easier way to get it back onto the subject, which I didn't have an easy way to get it back onto the subject because I didn't keep a focusing point active because I wanted to see how well the full autofocus did. Was that a big issue? No, not really, but on this photo with the baseball player trying to catch a ball at the wall, it focused on the HERS sign, which is what's up on the screen, and you can see that the player, unfortunately, is out of focus. Now, many people would have run that online and you would have never known the difference. I'm just showing you that it did miss in that situation. But all in all, when shooting slam ball and it's tracking these guys jumping around, doing slams and bouncing off the trampolines, it did track, it did lock on, and it did take photos that were nice and sharp. More so when you're using the better glass. Not as much with, say, the 200 to 600, because, you know, that one's not as good as those 1.4s, 1.2s, and 1.8s. Now, if you do decide to shoot with the electronic shutter, they did add the variable shutter option, though I don't really think it matters that much. I mean, it's nice to have that option, but if things are gonna get warbly, then does it even matter at the end of the day? Although we are using it right now here on this camera to get 1/48th of a second. Now, one thing I ran into a slight issue with when using faster glass out in bright sunlight is that the max shutter speed is 1/4000th of a second, which is pretty normal when it comes to a crop sensor camera or the lower end, not top of the line cameras. You get 1/4000th of a second with the mechanical shutter and 1/8000th of a second with the electronic. But when I was photographing the Phillies, I did not want to go to 1/8000th of a second because the ball was going to warp. So I was stuck at 1/4000th of a second. Now moving on to video features. They are nearly the same as what you find in the FX30. You've got your 10-bit 422 with full width 4K oversampled from 6K up to 60p. Now there is a slight 1.04x crop, which is basically nothing. You've got your 5-axis in-body stabilization, digital hot shoe. You have the S-Cinetone as well as S-Log3, which is what we are filming in right now. You do have 4K 120, but it does come with a 1.6x crop on top of that other crop. And you also have 1080 at 240 frames a second, which also comes with a 1.5x crop. Now, in terms of overheating, it's roughly 79, 80 degrees in here without the air conditioner on because we don't want all that noise. And at about 26 minutes, we did get a warning on the screen about overheating. And at 30 minutes, it totally shut down because it overheated. Now we're shooting 4K 24. That really shouldn't be the case because most cameras can just keep going and going at this point. Let me jump in here real quick and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're looking to build your very own online portfolio, use what I've been using for well over 10 years at this point for my personal website because it's simple, easy, and affordable, and you don't need to know any coding. To get your 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FronosPhoto. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FronosPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Overall, there's a lot borrowed from the FX30, like I said. You've got focus mapping, you've got focus breathing compensation, you've got user LUTs, so there's a lot there. You also have the AI-based auto framing, which does come in handy if you're a one-man band filming yourself and you want to move around a little bit and have the camera look like it's tracking you. That is a nice feature that it has. But a lot comes down to price. This camera comes in at $1,399 US for the body only, which is the same price as of today as Canon's R7, which is currently on sale. Normally it's $1,500. So you can see that the pricing is very similar. This is priced very well, but I'm personally not a person who wants to go into a crop sensor camera. 20 years ago when I started, that's all we had. But if all you can afford and you want to be in the Sony universe is a crop sensor camera, and that lets you get better glass, then I'm all for you going with something like this. Like I said earlier, no one's gonna know that I use this camera if I didn't tell them that my pictures were taken with this camera. It's all a matter of what you do. Also, that good glass helps. You've got a lot of glass from Sony, you have a ton of Tamron glass, you have a ton of Sigma glass. My recommendation would be find the full frame glass and don't invest in crop sensor glass. Just don't, because that's not gonna grow with you as you step up to the full frame Sony cameras. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you which one to get between the Canon and the Sony. We'll save that for a head-to-head comparison video, but if you are looking for this Sony camera, it did a nice job. It did nice stills, it does nice video, and you have to decide which direction you want to go. And truly, I thought that maybe the APS-C system was entirely dead from Sony, and now it's clearly not. But you also have to take into consideration something that's priced very similar, like Canon's R8, which is also full frame. Will Sony be coming out with a $1,500 full frame camera at some point, which basically renders something like this useless? I don't know, but I think full frame does give you great results. But then again, nobody really knows the difference. A good picture is a good picture is a good picture. So we're gonna show you a slideshow of some of my favorite images from this shoot so you can see the good, the bad, the indifferent, but mostly the good, because I like showing you the best results possible. Thank you very much for watching. Jared Polin, FronosPhoto.com. See ya.